So today's topic is Thanksgiving side dishes. Last week I did a video on turkey and gravy. This week is going to be stuffing, mashed potatoes, and cranberry sauce. And a lot of people say that this is the best part of the meal, and to be honest, they might be right. But let's not waste any more time and let's get to this. Alright, the first side we're going to make today is stuffing, which is my personal favorite. We're going to make a sausage and herb bread stuffing. But before getting started with that, we need to go over some bread options. And aside from making bread yourself, you've got a couple of options at the supermarket. You've got the bread aisle and the bakery section. And a lot of people do like to use sliced bread from the bread aisle, but honestly, that stuff mushes up a little bit too much. It's kind of bland. I don't really think it's all that good. What I think works best are these cheap-ass French loaves you get at like Walmart. This one was $1. So that's what I'm gonna be using today. Okay, to get started with the bread, cut it down the center, then follow that up by splitting it lengthwise through the middle, make a few more elongated cuts, and after all this, you should be able to cut the bread into cubes roughly 1 inch in size. And I prefer keeping the bread on the larger side because 1, it is going to shrink down during cooking, and 2, cutting it too small and it will begin to resemble that mushy stuff that comes from a box. This is also another disadvantage of using pre-sliced bread, as the slices start out too thin from the get-go. So put another point in the score column for using a loaf like I'm using. You can cut it how you want it. And once you get all of your bread cubed up, roll it over onto a sheet tray because we are going to bake this, and this is going to help the bread more easily absorb the stuffing liquids. So toss the bread with a little bit of melted butter or olive oil, then place it into a preheated 400-degree oven until it becomes dry, crispy, and lightly browned around the edges. This should take roughly 15 minutes, and if your pan is a little packed like mine, you might have to stir them up a time or two, but they will eventually get to where you want them. So for now, unload them into a mixing bowl and try not to snack on too many of these because they are really good just the way they are right now. So for now, let's set them aside and let's get the rest of our stuffing ingredients ready. Place a saute pan over medium heat, add a tablespoon of butter, or even better, chicken fat if you have it, along with 8 ounces of whatever ground sausage you prefer. And I'm just using regular breakfast sausage here, so stir it around and break it up until it browns up and the pan gets a little bit glazed itself. And this looks pretty good here, so I'll go ahead and toss the sausage in with the bread and return the pan to the burner. Add another tablespoon of butter along with 1/2 of an onion, 1 carrot, and 1 celery stick, all chopped down to a medium dice or 1/2 inch squares. Add a pinch of salt and continue to cook these until they soften up and become tender, and a little bit of browning isn't a bad thing on these things either. And I'd say we're looking pretty good here, so let's go ahead and work in the rest of our ingredients, starting with 2 cups of chicken or turkey stock, another pinch of salt, a teaspoon each of fresh thyme and sage, a 1/4 teaspoon of dry poultry seasoning, and for an added flavor boost here, let's work in a teaspoon of chicken base from the jar. Stir everything together and make sure not to forget to scrape up all the shit that's stuck to the bottom of the pan. Sophisticated people call that shit fond, but either way it has a lot of flavor and will be really good as a background note in the stuffing. So once the chicken base dissolves, combine everything in the pan with the sausage and the bread. Give everything a good tossing to combine all of it together and to cool off everything a little bit, because the next step is to work in 1 beaten egg, and the amount of eggs you add here is entirely up to you. If you want a more custardy stuffing, add 1 or 2 more, or omit the eggs altogether if you want a more loose stuffing. And once everything is good and mixed together, we can transfer it over to a 9x9 baking dish, and make sure to butter the edges first, especially if it's not a non-stick pan. Another important step here is to pack down all the edges and corners, and I'm going to cover the pan with foil to prevent the top from browning too much during baking. And this pan is now ready to go into a preheated 375-degree oven for 30 to 35 minutes. And if you want the top browned as well, remove the foil about halfway through. And once everything is all finished up, it should look something like this: lightly browned on top and golden brown and lightly crispy around the edges. Okay, with the stuffing out of the way, let's make some mashed potatoes, and I like to do these a little bit differently. I actually prefer red potatoes, and I know most people use russet potatoes, and they are a good choice, but they'll give you a more airy, fluffy consistency, whereas waxy potatoes will give you a more dense, creamy mashed potato. I guess this is all about personal preference, and with that said, Yukon Golds also make really good mashed potatoes, so try a few different varieties out and see which one you like the most. So I've got about 20 ounces of potatoes cut up here, and I've added just enough water to cover them, and I'm going to start them off on high heat, and it's very important to add a decent amount amount of salt here because seasoning the potatoes now works much better than trying to do it later. Now once the potatoes come to a boil, drop the heat down to a gentle simmer and cook them until they become tender. And you can usually tell they're done because they start to break apart and the skin on some of the pieces will start to separate from the flesh. And these look done here, so I'll strain them out, and a good pro tip here, drop them into the oven to dry them out more because waterlogged mashed potatoes suck. So while they're drying in the oven, add 5 tablespoons of butter and 4 ounces of heavy cream to a pan to heat up. And make sure to season this as well with salt and optionally a little bit of white pepper. If you've ever wondered why your mashed potatoes aren't as good as the ones at restaurants, season them better, dry them, and heat the dairy up, and you'd be surprised what a difference it will make. Okay, now that the butter and cream mixture is hot, take the potatoes out of the oven, and you can see by looking at the potatoes that they're looking much better. They're not waterlogged at all, and they even look a little bit dried out on the surface. So dump the butter and cream mixture into the potato pot and start working the whole thing together with a potato masher. And do more mashing and less stirring here too, because overworked potatoes can become gluey and you want to be careful not to overmix them. This should only take a minute or two. Smash the lumps and carefully mix it together, and soon enough you'll have super rich buttery mashed potatoes that will go perfectly with your Thanksgiving dinner. And moving on to our final recipe of the day, and the easiest of the 3, cranberry sauce. Start with 1 12-ounce package of cranberries, 2 to 3 ounces of water, 1 cinnamon stick, a pinch of salt, 2/3 of a cup of sugar, and finally the peels of 1 orange, and stir everything together with the spatula over low to medium heat. Okay, what you're looking for here with these cranberries is for them to break down and eventually they're going to burst. And that's going to release pectin into the sauce, which is going to thicken it up or turn it into a gel-like consistency. And if you notice, I use fresh cranberries because I don't really think it's a whole lot more work to use fresh ones than it is canned ones or frozen ones. And a lot of people do use these canned ones, but know that if you do that, these already have a lot of sugar inside of them, so I would skip the sugar, add everything else, and just add enough water to kind of adjust the consistency of it. So that's how you use the canned ones. If you were to use frozen ones, use them the exact same way you use these. Okay, after about 10 or 15 minutes of cooking, you'll notice the cranberries have broken down and released their pectin into the sauce. You might also need to adjust the thickness by adding water or reducing it down a little more, but it will thicken as it cools, so keep that in mind. And with that, I hope you have a wonderful Thanksgiving with your family, and if you do decide to try one of these recipes out, let me know what you think in the comments. But for now, and as always, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.